When we've previously investigated the sixth fetter, it's often been through a lens of whether or not there is a witness here, separate from the rest of the landscape in which it appears. But we haven't spoken as much about whether that landscape actually exists at all, or at least does it exist in the way in which we tend to assume that it does. Making something out of nothing, as it pertains to the sixth fetter, has a few different manifestations. First, it implies that there is a witness here, based entirely out of persistent sensations in the body and the erroneous conclusion that there must be something doing the seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and feeling, or else they would not be able to be experienced. We labor under the false belief that it takes a separate entity, a witnesser, to translate the raw electrical sensations of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and feeling into the world as we know it. And we assume that if this witness was not there, that we would simply exist in an unconscious state similar to the effects of anesthesia. The second large manifestation of Fetter 6 is that we assume that the things appearing in our sense fields are what we believe them to be. We believe that the forest on the other side of the field is both at a distance a certain number of meters away from us, and that there is something distinct that we are naming a forest and a field, and those two have some sort of relationship to each other. And of course, to me as the witnesser who's taking in the landscape. But as we have discovered with the seventh fetter, nothing has an inherent existence. So there cannot be such a thing as a field or a forest or a witness, at least not in the ways in which we readily conceptualize them. So take a moment to settle in. Take a few deep breaths just to quiet the mind and become present with your surroundings. Look around the space you are in and pick one object to rest your focus on. Do you immediately have the feeling that this is a nameable thing, which is located across a certain traversable distance from a you who is sitting here at the near end of the whole relationship? How much of this is readily apparent in your visual field? If you do not have enough of a visual faculty to do this exercise, you're welcome to do the same thing with the auditory field. Notice how quickly a sound becomes the source of the sound you believe it to be, at a certain distance away from the hearer, in a particular location as defined by where you are, yourself situated in the middle of a centralized location. It's very quick, isn't it? Can we do anything about it? Does it need to be changed? It's relevant to notice it because of how it shapes our belief that what we are experiencing is a real world of forms, objects, me and others, etc. I'm sitting outside right now with a stick of incense burning in front of me. There is a light breeze which is causing the thin tendrils of smoke constantly to move in alternating directions, curling, breaking into fragments, sometimes joining into one long ribbon, all the while dancing playfully around the perimeter. But in this experience, there is so much assumption. I can name a stick of incense, but is it really what I take it to be? There is a wooden stick rolled in some fragrant oils, but is any of that actually apparent without being told that that's what it is? It's neither incense nor anything that I can know it to be just by sight alone. I need to enlist multiple senses, smell and sight at least, to make sense of this object. And as it burns, there is an assumption that it is the same stick. But of course it's not. It's a new entity, moment by moment. There is also the creation of a concept of breeziness. There seems to be wind here. But how is that known? There's a light moving pressure felt along the reaches of the arms, face, and other patches of exposed skin. And there's a distinct sound appearing that memory suggests is likely associated with the concept of wind. Though it sounds similar to a number of other phenomena like engines, ocean waves, and more. And there is a visual appearance of many other objects like leaves and tree limbs, prayer flags and flower stems, all bending and swaying in some sort of synchrony that implies a unified force moving them all in unison. But is there anything of the sort knowable by direct experience? Haven't I just taken a variety of individual occurrences, thousands of small bites of unrelated information, and compiled them in such a way as to make sense of the world so that I can feel reasonably comfortable? Because I can collect all of these thousands of moving bits of color and conclude that they are not each moving willfully with their own conscious choice, but that there is one single force influencing them all. And then I can name this strange moving force wind, which I've learned is a relatively benign force of nature, at least compared to other possibilities like demonic energy or the tantrum of an angry god. But are any of these apparent in direct experience? No, they're not. There is simply movement of blotches of color, not even tree limbs or leaves. There is changing pressure in the felt sense field that isn't even skin, nor actually a feeling that we call pressure. The sound is a morphing, moving, fluctuating series of tones that aren't even one unified sound. They are a stream of micro sounds, all being lumped together and taken as a whole. The incense smoke itself is a wispy white powder, gracefully appearing in spontaneous locations, apparently wholly of its own accord. The visual appearance of the smoke can't be said to be related to an idea of wind or a breeze, because there is only a visual impression of something which I can conveniently call smoke. Though this does not bear any resemblance to the smoke I have seen in other contexts, like house fires or campfires. And the scent that I pick up, that I'm attributing to the incense, is itself just another distinct occurrence, not directly related to the stick of incense or the smoke, unless I use thought to unify them into one experience that I call smelling a stick of incense burning. Which brings us to the most pernicious of all of the somethings that we make out of nothing, the witness. There's an implication that there is something here which is situated in space such that it sees, hears, smells, tastes, and feels all of the aspects of this incense burning experience. Where is the location of the one who is able to see the visual field, or hear the sounds, or feel the sensations? Do you feel how there's an assumption that language creates by posing a seer of the visual field, separate from the visual field itself? We have dug into this in the sixth Fetter exercises, but this illusion can only come about because of the belief that is made out of the sensations that appear. How pervasive are these concepts that color all of our projections upon the world? Form out of formlessness, or something out of nothing, is what creates the world as we believe we know and interact with it. So sit with whatever is in front of you right now. Take a few more deep breaths, relax again, and allow your gaze to go completely soft. Feel your muscles relaxing and softening equally. Everything can be as it is with no need to impose any extra beliefs upon it. So much of our experience is purely a product of our imagination. So I would like for us to investigate this. Allow your gaze to stretch out into the periphery. Can you sense that there is as much attention on the edges of your visual field as there is in the center? Notice immediately how this small change can shift our experience of what is right in front of us. And now see if you can also expand your gaze up and down into the upper and lower boundaries of the periphery. Take in the full scope of your visual field. Gazing at the world in front of you this way, can you see that it all presents as one unified field of color? Not even distinct, knowable colors. This is just the most raw and direct experience we can discuss, still using our dualistic language. The language and our general way of operating divides that unified field of color into distinct regions and decides, often arbitrarily, that one of those parts is a form unto itself. The next step is to then conclude that that distinct part has a name and a meaning or purpose, and even a complete life story. I would like for you now to find any object in view that your eyes may land easily upon. Like we did earlier, notice that the second that your eyes have found it, that you already seem to know what this thing is, don't you? It's like this object comes online and brings with it an entire bubble of a universe, revolving entirely around it like it is the protagonist in its own film. So while holding your gentle gaze on it, relax again, allowing your vision to soften out and above and below to the total periphery. Rather than feeling like you are focusing directly on this object, widen the gaze out to the sides, the top, and the bottom of the visual field, taking in not just that object, but including in its field of being all of the space around it. Make sure you are also paying attention to the top and bottom of the visual field, allowing the attention to flood into those regions as well, invigorating the whole visual plane. This way of looking may itself be enough to flatten and draw the visual plane in closer. Can you start to recognize that this object is part of the environment in which it is existing, and not just a solitary beacon of isolated existence? You cannot define this object as having boundaries without defining whatever is appearing behind it: the wall, the trees, sky, cars, plants, etc. There may be multiple factors of the visual field that are playing a role in the creation of this seeming distinction between this object and its environment. The way that the light hits it in such a way that it seems to create distinct borderlines. Is it being contrasted with another region with different shading that is creating a sense of depth? Does the lighting or shading seem to be pushing a part behind or pulling another in front of this particular object? Continue to allow your vision to blend away the distinctions so that this object starts to become less and less distinct and more a part of the entire visual field again. Remember to relax as we do this. If you get tense and you feel like you're trying to make something happen, you're already defeating the process. A calm and settled mind is less apt to create these artificial distinctions. Is the object beginning to blend into the surrounding view? Is there any resistance to this happening? If so, just make note of it and allow it to either remain or pass on. It's okay to not have anything to hold on to, but this can be frightening to some people at certain times in their life. If the object that you were focused on is starting to dissolve, does it seem more difficult to make a story out of this blur? How much of an appearance needs to be recognizable in order for it to create its whole bubble universe? Continue allowing it to blend into the surrounding space until the entire visual field is again at this same plane where no particular shape or color is any more distinct than another. There is no separation outside of thought. The visual field can become like an abstract painting, with lots of indefinable colors merging into one another. No boundaries need to exist here. Why would anything need a boundary in this moment? Why would there even need to be a boundary between the seer and the seen? We have done many inquiries in the sixth Fetter about the creation of distance out of a two-dimensional visual field. But see if you can allow this abstract image to flatten, coming closer, dissolving the overlay of distance. If you can, it becomes apparent that even the unquestionable certainty of distance is itself something which is being created and imposed by the mind. Is there any evidence for the actuality of space in front of or around you? Feel into what you are using to decipher this from the raw visual, physical, and auditory cues that are being received. How much of it is being fed by assumptions and memories? Is the visual field actually happening out there somewhere? Or is it happening, for lack of a better word, right here? Are the sounds happening outside or being heard right here? If everything is happening precisely at zero distance, then all of our projections, pushing the source of the sound and sights out into the world far away from us, must also be a mental fabrication. Okay, relax, take a deep breath, and once again, allow the eyes to move to another part of the room and find another hue that catches their attention. Remain acutely aware as attention stays fixed on that spot of what happens as the brain starts to try to make sense of it. Be aware if there's a pull to try to put a boundary around it, to create a sense of this color being separate from everything else. It happens very, very quickly. Check in with the body to see if it feels like there is a feeling of grasping, a visceral need to know what this is, a need to make all of this understandable and knowable. Does it feel like there is anxiety and ambiguity? If you can, try to ignore this anxiety if you feel it. Instead, feel into the undefined spaciousness of this experience, where anxiety is but a label on top of completely innocuous, disconnected sensations. They too need to have a meaning imposed upon them to create anxiety out of nothing. If you have missed the experience or lost concentration, allow the visual field to become blurry again by paying more attention to the space surrounding it. We are trying to get a feel for that instinctual need to grasp and define, that persistent urge to make nothing into something. So, once again, take any undefined image that the eyes happen to land upon and watch with curiosity as that patch of color starts to take shape. As a distinct form begins to appear, make note of how long it takes before you can not only see what it is, but that you also know the name of the object. Does this patch of color now have a label that pops up alongside it? Does it suddenly seem to be standing out in stark contrast against the background? Do you feel that the tension in the body that was calling for understanding suddenly resolved as soon as the color could be named and recognized? And now that the object has a name, do you sense that the whole bubble universe springs into existence along with it? The name brings with it knowledge of what this object is for. Does it have a designated use? Have you used it in the past? or perhaps been clever and given it an alternative, unexpected use that still defined it just as much as the one that it was originally created to perform? Does the object now have a backstory? Can you remember how it appeared in your life? Did you purchase it? Was it a gift? What was the time of year or other circumstances in which that acquisition happened? Do you have specific memories around this object that either spring explicitly to mind, one after another, or perhaps form a vague undercurrent of identification with this thing that remains undefined, and yet like a tone of truth about it? And would another person immediately have the same connotations as you for this object? Would they have the same associations and uses for this object? With all of this happening, you can see how easy it is to create an entire world around every person and object we encounter, moment to moment. But are any of these memories or other mental projections actually here in the room? Do they have relevance to the actual physical object before you? If there was no memory, no having learned a name or a use, no past history of any kind, would this object still be the object you believe it to be? The label, the name, the memories, none of those appear on the color or shape itself. They are not inherent to this object. They are always an overlay based on what we want something to be. This is how we define our world into existence. Without the label, the name, the memories, there is no distinction between things, no things at all, no purpose, meaning, or significance, simply a sense field arising and passing. Can you see how quickly this mentally fabricated world of associations has popped into existence? It's effortless. It's much easier to perceive a world with all of these associated forms than it is to see things as they really are, with no inherent existence at all. And that should be a very interesting realization. Along with the name of this object, did you also sense any feelings of judgment that came as part of its bubble universe? Opinions about its appearance or its price or value? Opinions of who gave it to you? Maybe questioning its positioning in the room, feeling that it looks old and shabby or in need of a good cleaning. And then remember that none of those adjacent thoughts have any relation to the seeming object itself. The object that was minutes ago just an indescribable, indefinable form. The formless, colorful, boundaryless patch of light suddenly is the owner of an entire identity. But again, that identity is not inherent to it. It is a product of a boundless imagination. The imagination is creating this object and everything that comes along with it. It is imbuing everything and everyone that are encountered throughout the day with this artificial self nature. And ironically, the thoughts that create a world like this are constantly creating worlds out of more of these very thoughts. The aspects of experience that are taken to be the hallmarks of what it means to be a self, or to have agency, or to be a doer, a seer, a witness, are all this creation of something out of nothing by virtue of thoughts manifesting an identity out of more thoughts and bodily sensations. All of the names and roles that we adopt. I'm Jenny Smith, teacher, mother, good driver, bad singer, spiritual seeker, depressed but loving person, chameleon, and occasional passive aggressive bully. All of the backstories, the easily remembered conceptualized labels, all of it is creating an inherent self nature where one does not exist. It is the impulse to take fleeting, ever changing moments of impersonal appearances and to create a sense of cohesion from them. They are simply disparate thoughts and sporadic bodily sensations, all of which arise and fall away moment to moment. But this impulse uses memory and imagination to project a sense of continuity. And this continuity creates all of the aspects of what we take ourselves to be, including the vaguest sense of that which sees the object, or hears the bird song, or tastes the mango. If you have not been able to follow parts of this inquiry, missed sections of it because your mind became distracted, or if you weren't able to dissolve the object into the background, or peel off the labels, notice if you feel any sort of judgment about not being good enough at inquiry, or not being far enough along the path, perhaps not being a good meditator, or maybe complaining that this inquiry just isn't very clear. It's boring, or needlessly abstruse, or any other criticism that may appear. And see in this instant that those thoughts are all creating something out of nothing. They're creating a meditator or a spiritual seeker. They are creating somebody who is going to gain something by doing a practice. They are creating the idea that there is some benefit to be gained and that something will improve if you just see this thing that is being pointed out. And it is creating a thing called an inquiry and judgments about it, as though there can be any such thing as something that is objectively good or bad. There's an assumption that it is better to be able to follow an inquiry than it is to just fall asleep during it. But that's just a judgment with no inherent ties to the world that lies outside of your perceptual bubble. There are no independently existing things. And none of those apparent things have an inherent self nature, nor an inherent goodness or badness. These are all mind created projections that can be seen and let go of. And if you can recognize all of the ways in which you are allowing concepts to dictate experience, to fabricate a substantial world out of fleeting, insubstantial sense impressions, then there can come a moment of experiencing the world free from that imposed, fabricated form, a direct experience of formlessness. But you cannot talk about this. There is no way to conceptualize or convey any of it. It is simply a silent, empty spaciousness that doesn't need to be made into anything else. When all is fully open and fully unidentified, and there is likewise no projecting of identity onto anything, there is nothing that can be or needs to be said about any of it. There is nothing that could be known or grasped. And again, if this idea of an ungraspable, groundless existence sparks sensations in the body that we attribute to anxiety, that's okay. Feel them and recognize that they too have no quality of their own. There is only a passing sensation or cluster of sensations that we label as anxiety. And yet, there is no such thing as anxiety inherent in them. Nor do the sensations have a positive or negative valence to them. It's neither better nor worse to feel this sensation in the body. It is not something we need to get rid of. If you can simply allow the sensation to be there with absolutely nothing added to it. There is a way of viewing even these sensations where it is clear that there is nowhere to go and there is nothing that needs to be done because everything is perfectly appearing as it appears. It's almost ludicrous to think that anything needs to be different than it is, or that it could be different than it is, because all of those needs and ideas are just products of imagination that have no basis in actuality. If we stop projecting, they all dissolve immediately. And notice that even the idea of groundless, ungraspable existence is itself just a concept. It is not the experience itself. So you are becoming anxious about an imaginary concept of your own creation. It's a child imagining a monster in a closet and becoming so terrified by their own story that they can't bring themselves to get out of bed to turn the light on and investigate for themselves. So, throughout the rest of this week, see if you can be aware of the patterns of the mind as they race to make sense of an insensate world. Catch the projections moment to moment that are trying to make something definable where there was originally simply raw sensation. And when you tell yourself or others a story about your past, or hear someone else telling a story, recognize that it has only a limited, relative utility. Recognize what is coming up in the realm of emotions and in sensations, and feel the non inherent nature of all of them. You can feel that there is no inherent okayness or not okayness, no goodness or badness, no rightness or wrongness. All of those are judgments arising in the mind, and they do not touch the actual experience of whatever is arising. When you notice those movements of mind, take a breath and release them. Come back to a moment of silence where you are no longer imposing anything upon experience. Be intimately connected with whatever sensations are arising. Everything is left free to simply arise and simply pass, with no more made of it than the direct appearance of sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. Happy inquiring.